orphaned little alien starved, until an old man took her in. Part 1. The Discovery. Henry Cooper woke before the sun came up. This was his habit for the last 50 years, even though he no longer needed to check on cattle or crops. His body knew the rhythm of farm life and refused to change, even now that he was 72 years old and living alone. He put on his worn work clothes and made his way downstairs, his joints cracking with each step. The farmhouse was quiet. It had been quiet for 5 years, ever since died. He did not like to think about that time. Instead, he focused on his coffee and the work waiting in the barn. The morning was cold and gray. Snow had fallen during the night, covering the mountains in white. Henry's breath came out in small clouds as he walked across the yard. He had lived in Montana his whole life and still found the winter mornings beautiful, even at his age. The barn doors creaked as he opened them. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and dust. Henry kept the space clean but rarely used it anymore. He had sold most of his animals years ago. These days, the barn held only memories and broken tools he kept meaning to fix. Henry walked toward the back corner where he stored hay and feed that he no longer needed. He was thinking about clearing out the space, maybe converting it into something useful. He was not paying much attention to where he was walking. Then he heard a sound. It was not a sound he recognized. It was not a bird or an animal he knew. It was a soft, strange noise, almost like a person trying to breathe through pain. Henry stopped and listened. The sound came from behind the pile of old hay. He moved the hay carefully, pulling it away with his hands. His heart began to beat faster. He had no reason to be afraid, but something in that strange sound made him nervous. What he found made him forget how to breathe. There was a pod. It was small, no larger than a car, made of metal that looked like nothing Henry had ever seen. The surface was smooth and curved, but it was damaged. One whole section was cracked open, and steam came from inside. The metal was still warm. Henry took a step back. His mind tried to understand what he was looking at. This was not from Earth. He knew enough to understand that. This was something from space. He should have been afraid. He should have called someone. But he was a doctor's son, and his father had taught him that when someone needed help, you helped first and worried about everything else later. Henry moved closer to the damaged pod. He looked inside. There was a child inside. The creature was small, much smaller than a human child. Its skin was pale silver, almost like moonlight made solid. It had large eyes that were closed, and the rest of its body was wrapped in something that looked like cloth but felt like nothing Henry had ever touched. The child was not moving. For a moment, Henry thought the creature was dead, but then he saw it breathing. The small chest moved up and down very slowly. The creature was alive, but barely. Henry did not think. He reached in carefully and lifted the small body. It weighed almost nothing. The child made a soft sound, a weak chirp, but did not wake. Henry could feel how thin the body was, how the bones seemed too close to the skin. This child was starving. He carried the creature carefully out of the barn and into the house. The morning light was beginning to show through the windows. Henry laid the child on the kitchen table and looked at it properly for the first time. The creature had arms and legs like a human, but everything was too delicate, too thin. The fingers were long and had too many joints. The face was almost human, but not quite. The eyes were very large, and the mouth was smaller. There were no visible ears, but there were small openings on the sides of the head. Around one thin wrist was a piece of metal with symbols Henry could not read. Henry knew he should be surprised. He knew he should be afraid. But what he felt was pity. This was a child, and this child was dying from hunger. He filled a bowl with warm water and a cloth. He washed the creature carefully, removing dust and dirt from the journey through space. The skin was soft and warm. The child made small sounds but did not wake up. Henry worked carefully, trying not to hurt anything. When the child was clean, Henry wrapped it in one of his blankets. He still had them, stored in a box in the closet. He had not had the heart to get rid of them. Now, holding the small alien wrapped in his wife's blanket, he was glad he had kept them. Henry prepared some warm broth. He had made beef and vegetable broth that morning before he knew his life was about to change. He took a spoon and carefully let some liquid fall into the creature's mouth. The child swallowed without waking. For 3 hours, Henry sat at his kitchen table and fed the small alien drops of broth. The creature remained unconscious but kept swallowing. Henry could see that the breathing became slightly stronger. The color of the skin seemed less gray. By noon, Henry was sure the creature was going to live. He sat back in his chair and thought about what he should do. He knew the right answer. He should call the police or the government or someone in authority. A space creature had landed on Earth. This was important. This was probably the most important thing that had ever happened. But Henry looked at the child wrapped in his blanket, and he could not make the call. The child was helpless. The child was innocent. Henry had spent his whole life trying to do what was right, and right now, what was right was to keep this creature safe and alive. He knew that if he reported this, the government would take the child away. They would study it. They would not be cruel about it, probably, but they would not love it. They would not sit with it through the night and make sure it ate. They would not wrap it in a dead woman's blanket and sing to it like it was their own grandchild. Henry went to the window and looked out at the snow-covered fields. Somewhere out there, people were looking for this child. Someone missed it. Someone loved it, maybe. But for now, it was here, and it was his responsibility. Henry Cooper, 72 years old, retired farmer, widower, made a decision. He would keep the child safe. He would hide it from the world as long as he could. He would nurse it back to health and figure out what to do next. As the sun began to set and the mountains turned purple in the fading light, Henry sat in his kitchen with an alien child and made a promise he did not fully understand the weight of. He would protect this creature with everything he had. He would do whatever was necessary to keep it alive. Orphaned little alien starved, until an old man took her in. Part 2: Healing and Connection. 3 weeks had passed since Henry found the creature in his barn. The child was awake now, most of the time. Henry had moved her to the guest bedroom, the one that had belonged to his daughter when she visited. He made a bed of blankets and pillows on the floor, thinking it might be more comfortable than a human bed. The creature had begun to show signs of understanding. Her large eyes followed Henry around the room. Sometimes she made soft sounds that seemed almost like questions. Henry had started to think of her as female, though he had no real reason to believe this. He simply needed to think of the child as something specific, and female seemed right. He called her Lyra. It was a name had always loved, had talked about naming a granddaughter Lyra if they ever had one. Now, Henry used the name for this small alien creature. Feeding Lyra had become Henry's most important work. He had tried many things. Regular broth worked, but he could see the child was not getting what she needed. She remained thin, and her movements were still slow and weak. Henry spent hours in his library, reading old books about plants and minerals. He had never been much of a reader before, but now he studied like he was back in school. He found references to unusual mineral combinations in botanical guides. He read about plants that grew only in specific soils. He learned about trace elements that humans rarely thought about. Henry was not a scientist, but he was determined to understand what his strange daughter needed. One morning, he remembered a plant that grew on his property. It was something he had loved. She called it moonflower, though Henry was not sure if that was the real name. It had pale silver leaves and grew in the shaded part of the garden. He had never paid much attention to it, but now he dug some up and brought it inside. He crushed the leaves and mixed them into warm water, making a pale tea. He was not sure if this was safe. He might be poisoning the child, but Lyra needed something more than broth, and Henry had to try. When he offered the mixture to Lyra, she drank it eagerly. Her small hands reached out and held the cup herself. Over the next 2 days, Henry could see the difference. Lyra became more alert. Her eyes grew brighter. The pale silver of her skin took on a faint glow. Henry began to search his land more carefully. He found other plants with unusual properties. There was a deep red root that grew near the stream. There was a blue flowering plant that grew in the rocky parts of his property. He experimented carefully, always testing small amounts first, watching Lyra's response. The alien child began to improve. By the end of the 3rd week, Lyra could walk. Her legs were still unsteady, but she could move from room to room. She held onto Henry's hand when she walked, her long fingers gripping his rough old hand with surprising strength. Henry built a small room for Lyra in the corner of the kitchen. He wanted to keep her close while he worked. He gathered scraps of wood and metal and built her a bed that was shaped differently from human furniture, with a high back and curved sides. He made toys from wood pieces, carving them into shapes that he hoped might interest a young alien. Lyra played with these toys with simple joy. She would hold them in her long fingers and turn them over and over, making soft chirping sounds. Sometimes the sounds were happy. Sometimes they seemed like questions or calls. Henry wondered what language she was trying to speak. He began to try to teach her English. He pointed at things and said the words slowly: cup, water, food, chair, hand. Lyra watched his face intently as he spoke. She repeated the sounds after him, though her voice was different from a human voice. It was higher and had strange harmonics. When she said his name, it sounded like music. "Henry," she said, and her large eyes seemed to smile even though her mouth barely moved. Henry felt something shift inside his chest. This small creature, this alien child from beyond the stars, had learned to say his name. He sat down on the kitchen floor and felt tears come to his eyes. Had always wanted, she had asked him about it many times near the end when she was sick. He had told her there was still time, but there had not been time, had died before they could have. Now he had a granddaughter. She came from a different world, and she looked like nothing human, but she called him by his name and held his hand. Henry thought that would have loved this. He thought was probably laughing at him from wherever she was now. The relationship between Henry and Lyra deepened with each passing day. He began to understand her needs better. She needed certain foods. She needed to sit in the sunlight coming through the windows. She needed to be touched and held. She became anxious when Henry left the house and calm when he returned. Henry created routines. They had breakfast together. They took morning walks through the garden and fields. In the afternoon, they sat outside and watched the clouds. In the evening, Henry brought a star chart into the kitchen and showed Lyra pictures of the night sky. When he pointed to the stars, Lyra made sounds that seemed sad. She pointed at the pictures, then looked out the window at the real stars. Henry understood. She was remembering her home. She was remembering the place where she came from and the family that had probably lost her. "Your people," Henry said quietly. "Your family is out there." Lyra made a soft sound and rested her head against Henry's shoulder. One evening, a government vehicle came slowly down the road. Henry's heart jumped into his throat. He took Lyra to her room and told her to stay quiet. 2 men in uniforms came to the door and asked if Henry had seen anything unusual. They showed him a picture of a strange object, asking if he had heard any strange noises or explosions. Henry looked them in the eye and lied. He said he had seen nothing, he had heard nothing. They seemed satisfied. They told him to call if he saw anything. Then they left. Henry stood at the window and watched their vehicle drive away. He understood now that he was breaking the law. He was hiding something from the government. He was risking his freedom and his home. But when he went back to Lyra's room and saw her small face watching him with those large, intelligent eyes, he knew he would make the same choice again. This child was his now. They belonged to each other. Nothing would change that, orphaned little alien starved, until an old man took her in. Part 3: The Threat. 6 months had passed. Spring had come to Montana and the snow had melted from the mountains. Lyra had grown stronger. She was now more active, more curious about the world. She could speak in simple English sentences. She could walk without help. She was, to anyone watching, becoming more human in her behavior, though her appearance remained alien. Henry had become careful about keeping her hidden. He kept the curtains drawn in certain rooms. He made sure she stayed inside when the mail carrier came. He installed new locks on the back door. He had become paranoid about discovery, but he had good reason. The world was searching for the vessel that had carried Lyra to Earth. News reports showed pictures of a damaged spacecraft somewhere in space. Scientists talked about the possibility of alien life. The government was quiet about what they knew, but Henry could sense that authorities were looking for something. He had thought about contacting someone, telling the world about Lyra. Maybe it was time. Maybe she needed to be with her own kind. But whenever he looked at her, whenever she called him Henry and held his hand, he could not make himself do it. Then Price came to the door on a Tuesday morning in April. Was a neighbor who lived 3 miles away. Henry knew him slightly but had never been close. Ran cattle and kept to himself. They had nodded at each other at the feed store a few times. Asked about supplies Henry had ordered from town. The order had been unusual. Plant seeds, mineral supplements, special foods. Mentioned that the store owner had noticed the order and wondered if Henry was sick. Henry made excuses. He said he was experimenting with a garden, seemed satisfied. Henry thought the visit was over. But 2 days later, Henry looked out his kitchen window and saw standing at the edge of the property. Was looking into the house through the side window. The side window where Lyra sat. Henry's hands went cold. He moved quickly, pulling Lyra away from the window and into the back of the house. He heard walk around the building, looking in every window he could find. The next day, federal agents came to the farm. This time there were more of them and they had a warrant. They came with equipment and serious expressions. The head agent, a woman named Hayes, told Henry they had information that he might be harboring something illegal. Henry's heart was beating so hard he thought it might break his ribs. He kept his face calm. He said nothing about Lyra. He let them search the house. They found nothing. Lyra was hidden in a space under the basement that Henry had discovered weeks earlier. It was barely more than a crawl space, but it was invisible unless you knew to look for it. But the agents were not satisfied. They talked about coming back. They talked about watching the property. They implied that Henry might be in serious trouble if he was hiding something. That night, Henry packed a bag. He gathered supplies, food, and water. He took Lyra and left the farm under cover of darkness. He did not turn on lights. He drove his old truck with the headlights off until he was far from the property. They headed into the mountains. Henry had hunted in those mountains 40 years ago, before his knees got bad. He knew the terrain. He knew where the caves were and where the water ran clean and cold. The first night was cold. They walked for hours and Lyra became tired. Henry carried her on his back the last 2 miles. They found a shelter under an overhang of rock, and Henry built a small fire hidden from view. Lyra huddled close to Henry, shaking from cold and fear. Henry wrapped her in blankets and held her against his warmth. "We have to leave," he told her. "Bad people want to take you away." Lyra understood more English now. She made a soft sound of distress and held on to Henry with all her strength. "I will not let them," Henry said. "I promise you I will keep you safe." Over the next weeks, Henry and Lyra became part of the mountains. They moved constantly, staying ahead of the search teams that were looking for them. Henry's body hurt. His old joints ached. His lungs burned when they climbed. He had not known if he had this much strength left in him. But he did it because Lyra needed him to do it. They found a mountain stream and followed it to a hidden valley. There were caves here, caves that Henry had found years ago but had almost forgotten about. They set up camp in one of the caves, where no one could see them from above. Henry hunted small animals. He gathered plants. He taught Lyra to move quietly, to hide, to be invisible. She was a fast learner. Her alien instincts were good. She could sense danger before Henry could. The search teams came close several times. Henry and Lyra would hide deeper in the mountains, moving in the darkness, becoming like ghosts themselves. But Henry was 72 years old, and this could not last forever. His body was failing. One morning he woke up and could barely move. His back was in agony. His hands were covered in wounds and cuts that would not heal properly. He sat in the mouth of his cave and looked at Lyra. The child was stronger now, healthier, but she was also sad. She understood that they could not keep running. Henry made a decision. He had tried to protect her by hiding, but hiding was not going to work. He needed to do something bigger. He needed to change the world's mind about what Lyra was. He needed to make people see her not as a threat but as a person worth protecting, a person worth love, orphaned little alien starved, until an old man took her in. Part 4: The Stand. Henry climbed to the top of the mountain. His body was screaming in pain, but he did not stop. He needed to get where the signal was strong enough. He had an old laptop that worked on battery power, and he had brought it into the mountains with him weeks ago. From the ridge he typed a message. He wrote about finding Lyra dying in his barn. He wrote about the choice to help her instead of turn her over. He wrote about who she was, not a threat, not a creature to be studied and locked away. A person, a child, an innocent being deserving of compassion and protection. He sent the message to every news organization he could find. He sent it to international agencies. He sent it to universities and research centers. He sent it to private citizens he found on the internet. Then he sent a message to the government. He told them where he was. He told them to come, but to come ready to listen. The response came faster than Henry expected. Within hours, news agencies were reporting the message. A 72-year-old man and an alien child, somewhere in the Montana mountains. The government demanding he surrender. Scientists and doctors saying they should be allowed to examine the child. And then, gradually, other voices. People around the world began to respond. They shared Henry's message. They talked about compassion. They asked why humanity was not choosing kindness. They demanded that governments listen to Henry's story. A scientist named Doctor read Henry's message and became interested. Doctor was someone who studied the possibility of alien life. He had credentials, respect, and a platform. He went on television and said that what Henry had done was remarkable. He said the child was almost certainly intelligent and deserving of protection. "This is not about science," Doctor said on the news. "This is about whether we as humans choose compassion or fear. This old man chose compassion. We should honor that choice." More scientists joined him. A geologist, a linguist, a medical researcher. They all said in their different ways that Henry's action was right. They said the child should be protected. The government still wanted to take Lyra, but now they could not do it quietly. The world was watching. Then something unexpected happened. A message came from space. The collective, Lyra's people, received the news about Henry and Lyra. Through translated radio signals, they sent a message to Earth's governments. They said that the human had done what their own kind would do. They said he had shown the warrior spirit of his species, protecting the young against all odds. But more important, they said they wanted to meet this human. They wanted to understand a species that would risk everything to protect another being. They said that if Earth treated Lyra with kindness, perhaps there was hope for peaceful contact between their worlds. The message changed everything. Suddenly, governments were no longer fighting against Henry. They were negotiating with him, but Henry did not trust the negotiations. He had spent too long running, too long hiding. Instead, he asked for a representative, someone he could talk to, someone who could promise protection for Lyra. Doctor came to the mountain himself. He arrived with a small team, but he came peacefully. He did not have weapons or restraints. He came simply to talk. Henry stepped out of the cave where he had been living for 3 months. His clothes were torn and dirty. His face was covered with a long beard. His hair was wild. He looked like a wild man, not a civilized person. But when Henry held Lyra's hand and stepped into the light, something changed. You could see the love between them. You could see it in the way Lyra held his hand. You could see it in the way Henry looked at her, with eyes that held all the hope and all the protection a human could give. Doctor stopped walking. He stood still and just looked at them. "She is beautiful," Doctor said. Henry did not smile, but something in his face softened. "What will happen to her?" Henry asked. "What do you want to happen?" Doctor responded. Henry looked down at Lyra. She looked up at him. She made a soft sound. "I want her to be safe," Henry said. "I want her to learn and grow. I want the world to understand that she is not a thing to be examined. She is a person." "I can help with that," Doctor said, "but not if you keep running." Henry took a long breath. He had been running for 3 months. He was tired. His body was broken, and Lyra deserved more than a cave in the mountains. "What kind of protection can you offer?" Henry asked. Doctor made a proposal. There would be an international facility created, a place dedicated to peaceful alien contact. Henry and Lyra would live there. Scientists would study peaceful coexistence, not just biological examination. Lyra would be educated. She would be treated like a child, not a specimen. And most importantly, Henry would never be separated from her. They would be together. It took 3 hours of conversation on that mountain, but Henry finally agreed. He came down from the mountains with Lyra beside him. The world watched as an elderly human and a small silver alien child walked toward peace. The cameras recorded everything. The old man holding the child's hand, the child looking up at him with trust and love, the moment when humanity showed it could be more than fear and weapons. When news organizations asked Henry what he had been thinking, hiding a creature from the government, he gave a simple answer. "She needed help," he said. "That was enough for me. Orphaned little alien starved until an old man took her in." Part 5: New Beginnings. 2 years had passed since Henry and Lyra came down from the mountains. The International Center for Peaceful Alien Contact had been built in the high mountains of Colorado. It was a remarkable place, designed by engineers and architects who had worked together to create a space where human and alien could live together. Henry and Lyra had rooms in the main building. The rooms were adapted for both species. There were human chairs and beds for Henry, and curved sleeping spaces for Lyra. There were windows that looked out over mountains that reminded both of them of their hidden valley. Henry was now 74 years old, and his body was finally beginning to show the strain of his years. His back hurt most days. His hands were rough and weathered, but he was still strong in the way that mattered. He was still Lyra's protector. Lyra was growing. She was now 5 years old in human time, though she had developed faster than a human child. She could speak English fluently. She could read and write. She was learning about human culture and science, and she was learning about being a bridge between 2 worlds. The center employed hundreds of people. Scientists studied peaceful coexistence. Engineers developed technologies that worked for both human and alien physiology. Teachers educated both human children and young who had come to learn, and it was all based on the simple idea that Henry had demonstrated in his barn, that compassion could be the foundation for understanding. Doctor had become a close friend to Henry. The 2 men spent time together, talking about the work being done at the center. The research they conducted was changing humanity's understanding of itself. By studying how to communicate with the scientists were learning how to communicate better with each other. One afternoon, Henry sat with Lyra in the observation room, looking out at the mountains. Lyra had a tablet computer, and she was reading about her home world. She had questions about her original family. "Will we ever go there?" she asked. "To the world?" Henry had always known this question would come. He had dreaded it and hoped for it at the same time. "Do you want to go?" Henry asked. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "I want to know my people, but I do not want to leave you." Henry put his arm around her. "Then we will go together. When the time is right, we will go together." Lyra made a soft sound of contentment and leaned against Henry. The love between them was simple and complete. It had survived hunger, fear, running through mountains and government agents. It had survived the weight of changing the world. The collective had sent messages to Earth regularly since Henry and Lyra had come to the center. They were impressed by how humans had responded. They were particularly impressed by Henry's choice to protect Lyra without knowing whether it would benefit him. They called it the human courage, and they wanted to understand it. Leaders from both species had begun serious negotiations about trade and peaceful contact. The first step had been simple curiosity and compassion, but now it was growing into something larger: real relationships, real understanding. Henry had been invited to speak to world leaders. Governments wanted to understand the philosophy that had allowed him to make his choice. Religious leaders wanted to understand the moral foundation. Philosophers wanted to study his actions. But Henry did not think of himself as a philosopher or a teacher. He thought of himself as a grandfather, which is what he was. One evening, a formal dinner was held to honor Henry for his role in beginning peaceful contact with the leaders from many countries attended. Scientists and artists came. News organizations broadcast it to the world. Henry sat at the head table, uncomfortable in formal clothes. Lyra sat beside him, wearing special clothing that had been designed for. She looked beautiful and serious. When it came time for speeches, the leader of the delegation spoke first. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin that seemed to glow. She had traveled from the specifically for this dinner. "This human saved one of our children," the leader said. "He did not know what she was. He did not know who she was. He only knew that she needed help. This is the quality we have learned makes humanity special, not your technology, not your weapons, but your choice to help those who cannot help themselves, your choice to love those who are different. This is why we wish to be allied with your kind." Then Henry stood to speak. He had not prepared words, he never did, he simply spoke what was true. "I am not a hero," he said quietly. "I am an old man who found a hungry child. Any person would have done the same. I do not understand why this is surprising to the world. Maybe the world has forgotten that this is what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to help each other. We are supposed to protect the weak. We are supposed to choose compassion when we could choose fear." He looked at Lyra. "When I found Lyra, I did not think about changing the world. I only thought about saving one life. I still think that is the only thing that matters. We save one life at a time. We protect one person at a time. We show kindness one moment at a time. That is all that matters." The room was silent. Then slowly people began to applaud. The applause grew louder. Humans and standing together, honoring Henry and Lyra for showing the world that compassion was stronger than fear. After the dinner, Henry and Lyra walked together in the garden of the center. It was night, and the stars were visible above them. Lyra pointed to a particular star, pale and distant. "That is she said. "In that direction. Do you think we will really go there?" "Yes," Henry said. "When I am ready, we will go." "Will the journey be difficult?" Lyra asked. "Probably," Henry said, "but we have survived difficult things before." Lyra took Henry's hand. Her long fingers gripped his weathered hand with familiar comfort. "As long as we are together," Lyra said, "I am not afraid of anything." Henry looked at this small being who had come to him from the stars. He thought about how she had wanted. He thought about how the universe had given him a granddaughter, and how that granddaughter had changed the course of human history. But more than that, he thought about how he had changed her life, how he had picked her up from a dying pod and held her and cared for her, how love had transformed both of them. "I am not afraid either," Henry said, "not anymore." They stood together in the garden, the old human and the young alien, looking up at the stars and thinking about tomorrow. The world had watched their story. The world had learned from their example. But for Henry and Lyra, the most important thing was simple. They had each other. They had found family when they were both alone. And as they looked up at the stars together, they both knew that the greatest strength a person could have was the strength to love someone completely, without fear, without hesitation, and without wanting anything in return. The story of Henry Cooper and Lyra had changed the course of human history. But for them, it was just a story of one old man and one young alien child, bound together by love, looking toward a future they would face together.